I'm getting feedback and shit. That is loud. Everyone on the count of three say hi, Ed. 1, 2, 3. Hi, Ed. There we go. All right. I assume he's over there. Welcome. Can we... I did threaten that we were going to take y'all on a field trip to go to one of the other talks. Can we bring this down just a notch? Because I'm really fucking loud and... This is going to get obnoxious. Thanks. He's found it. It's the knob. Test. I get quieter. It's really quiet now. Okay. Test. It's still really fucking loud. Fuck. All right, there we go. That's as good as we're going to get. Oh, there's one on the other side. Sir, what's your name, sir? No, this guy over there. On my left. He's ignoring me, though. Hey, thank you. I appreciate that. All right, okay, yeah. Mostly it was an OSHA issue, right? Like everyone's going to be fucking deaf by the end of this. My name is Bruce Potter. There's all my contact info if you want to track me down. I always start my talk with exactly the same basic premise, which is you shouldn't believe anything I'm about to tell you. I learned a couple weeks ago what the term autodidact was. I saw a whole bunch of people using it on Twitter. I'm like, that must be important. So I autodidacted my way to learn what autodidact was. It means you're self-taught for those that can't get that out of context. I'm actually a college dropout. Went to school in the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Anyone go to UAF? No? Anyone graduate from UAF? Whoop. No. No one graduates from that school. Mike Osman, who some of you may know, is a UAF dropout. There's many esteemed dropouts from that school. Founder of the Shmoo Group. I'm currently employed as the CISO of Expel, which is kind of imagine an MSSP and an MDR company got together and made a baby. That's us. We're hiring SOC engineers and analysts and reverse engineer type folks. So if you're interested, come find me after the talk. Last year, I served as the Senior Technical Advisor to the Presidential Commission on Cybersecurity, which was a fantastically interesting experience. I got to travel around the country, talk to people in the public and private sector about what's going on with respect to cyber risk management, cybersecurity, what they care about, what would help them, all that kind of stuff. And I really came to the conclusion that there's two types of organizations in the world right now. There's organizations that kind of have a robust and full understanding of cyber risk, and they look at cyber risk like they look at any other risk, where they just merge it into, the financial risk and everything else that they think about. And then the other side of the world is saying, please God, just tell me what to do, right? Like, where do I buy the security? Because it's really hard, and I can't find people, and I can't hire people, and everything I buy sucks, and I need help. And there's a really tight breaking line between the kind of haves and have-nots in this space. And it got me thinking of, where are the places where I see that we're falling down? Like, I get up and I point and say, hey, this shit's all broken, but where can we do better? Like, what materially pushes the ball forward when it comes to making our organizations more secure? And one of the things that I was really privileged to have in my early career was a stretch at a company called Cigital. Used to be Reliable Software Technologies, and now Cigital. And actually, they got sold to somebody recently after a long time. But they started out as a reliability software company where they looked at the reliability of systems, right? Trying to make them as resilient as possible to run in the face of, whatever kind of bad thing was happening, not just attack, but hardware failure, operator failure, that kind of thing. And they kind of branched out and got into software security and software assurance, which is really where they've made their bread and butter for the last little bit. So what's interesting about reliability testing is it's almost the opposite of security testing, right? With reliability testing, you're trying to prove that the thing doesn't suck. Like, the thing is going to act the way you want it in the face of adversity. In security, we are often just trying to prove that the thing sucks, right? Like, that seems to be our goal. Like, can I break it? Yes. Woo! Like, I have proved my point. Your thing sucks, and you move on. I say that a little tongue-in-cheek, knowing that we're testing these products and services because we're trying to make it more secure. But we tend to have this view of, like, once I've proven that it's bad, now go fucking fix it, right? And it's not well integrated into how does our testing integrate into the broader initiatives to create more secure systems. So I spent a lot of time with actual software testers, people who had PhD theses on software testing, which is super not exciting, but it's actually very useful and interesting. And I fell into that trap that a lot of us do to think that what I know is the same thing that what you all know, right? Like our own experiences drive our understanding, and we think everyone has had similar experiences. Of fucking course, everyone has had a long stretch with a company that knows a lot about testing, and you've got all this knowledge. And I realized, no, of course, actually, you don't. Most people come to this from all kinds of different directions, and a lot of you have probably never had that experience. So today is my attempt to imbue upon you, much like if we were in D&D and I was imbuing a sword, imbue upon you a bunch of knowledge around testing. However, for anyone that follows me on Twitter, you know that I got a little unhinged last week around some of the shit that was going on in our wonderful echo chamber, so I'm going to address that first. So let's play a game, shall we? The answer is yes, we shall. Okay. Secure, not secure? Not secure, right? Yeah, okay. This is not a complicated one. Equifax has been, yes, yeah, Knight's Tale. Any movie that's got David Bowie and a whole bunch of people dancing in it is good. So in A Knight's Tale, there's that scene where who's the orator dude? Like whatever his fucking role is. Chaucer, yeah, thank you, Chaucer. I should probably know that. Like that seems like an important bit of history. So Chaucer's up there, and he's in front of all these people, and he's giving this huge oration, and he's all fired up, and at the end of it, he stops, and the audience is deadly silent, and then somebody goes, hooray! And then everyone erupts in applause. Well, that was a real thing. Like if you watch the outtakes of the movie, they filmed that, I think, in Romania, and like no one in the audience knew any English. So like this dude gets up there and he's giving this impassioned speech and they have no idea what he's saying, so he gets done and they're like, And like so one guy goes hooray and then the whole audience erupts, and it was totally unscripted. It was a fantastic. Hey, the recycling's in the back. It's clown whiskey. It's clown rye, actually, called Rye Smile. So, you know, we'll just tit for tat that one. Anyway, wow, where the fuck was I going with that? So Chaucer, radiance. Okay, so this came up. So this is the now ex-CISO of Equifax, and people were like, "Well, she's got a music degree." I'm like, "Well, I'm a fucking college dropout from Alaska. Like, let's jam on that shit for a while." And then there was the camps of patching is hard, and then people were like, well, just fucking patch your shit. Like people like, have you worked in a real world where you know how hard patching is? So like, well, fuck you, just apply the patch, asshole. So you know, this was Twitter last week, right? Like, I mean, I'm summarizing, but it was like have you heard InfoSec is an asshole? I'll get back to that, but hold on, secure or not secure? Not secure, right? Okay. So Flash has a long history of being woefully not secure. It's basically deprecated, even though the internet still requires it. My son is constantly going to websites where it's like, Dad, it needs Flash. I'm like, well, then open Chrome, because that's the only thing that we trust with it. Sorry, I'm not going to get into browser wars today. However, anyone know who this is? I'll be shocked. Besides, holy shit, sir! Who said that? Yeah, that is Bark and Brad Arkin. That is good. Wow, I didn't expect anybody to know who Brad was. So Brad, I worked with Brad at Cigital. Brad's got a master's degree in discrete math. He did a lot of crypto work. He's got an MBA from Columbia. And he was one of the things that we did at Cigital back in the day was there was an antivirus vendor that I won't name, but they were the first antivirus vendor that was trying to push the definitions out in real time to their users. Because I don't know how many of you have been doing this for longer than fuck all, but it used to be that you had to get like the AV definitions and download them and install them on machines. And it was a big deal to have like security software that updated itself. And everyone was scared because like, holy shit, auto update, how would that ever work, right? And that wasn't that long ago, okay? That was 16, 17 years ago where like auto update was still scaring us because we thought it was bad. Right. Seriously, a decade and a half ago, you're like, don't fucking auto update. Now you're like, if you turn that shit off, I will kill you, right? So we've come a long way. It's like 2 Twitters ago. So Brad led that team. On the face of it, that dude, he's an engineer, he knows security, he knows business, he's got a degree in discrete math. and yet he works at Adobe, and their products still have security problems, right? So the pedigree, Brad's pedigree, and the previous Equifax CISO's pedigree, and whatever, is a small part of the equation, right? How about this one? Secure or not secure? Secure. Who said secure? Secure. So, that was my record scratch sound, by the way. That was as good as it gets. I'm not hip enough to have audio in my slides. WordPress has a remarkably robust reporting apparatus. They have their own internal staff that look for vulnerabilities. They have the ability to press a big red button in the interface to upgrade it. That is seriously how hard it is to upgrade WordPress, right? Do you want to upgrade? Yes. Poof. And you're done. Okay, cool, thanks. That was way too easy, and I guess you didn't do anything, because nothing could be that easy. But it turns out WordPress updates are that easy. They have bug bounty programs. It's a very sophisticated system that they put in place to make WordPress more secure. It used to be WordPress was like the whipping boy of online content management systems. Most of it now is just shitty plugins, right? WordPress in its stock trim is pretty damn good these days. There's still some legacy crap hung around their neck, but for the most part, it's the plugins that screw you, not the core of WordPress. So, I like to trademark the fact that building and deploying a secure system is difficult. I don't know if you noticed, but I'm gonna put that out there. A lot of puzzle pieces have to fall into place in order for systems to be secure, right? In order for Equifax to be secure, there's a lot of things that have had to happen, right? You've got to have good security leadership, but you also have to have buy-in from the executive team, strong technical staff. You have to integrate with the business. You have to be willing to think and have and put security in the forefront. Microsoft, man, you talk about a transformational story. They were absolutely the laughingstock of the security community circa 1998, 99, 2000, 2001. Trusted computing memo came out. Bill Gates says, yea, verily, we are going to give a shit about security in a very serious way. And they have. And you can complain and bitch and moan about their god-awful freaking interface and how long it takes for fucking updates to apply and all that shit. But at the end of the day, they're a lot more secure than they used to be, right? The browser, Edge, or whatever the hell it's called, doesn't suck. I mean, from a security perspective, it sucks. Sucks in a lot of other ways. The biggest dumpster fire of browsers out there is Firefox. By a country mile. It's a piece of shit. And I don't mean that, yeah, I do. I'm sorry. I did, actually. I was meant to run that right up the middle. So Mudge and Sarah Zacco and the Cyber ITL work that they've done, they looked at browsers at the binaries. And so they instrument, if you haven't seen Cyber ITL, go look at it. They'll instrument binaries, and they look for safe and unsafe things that manifest themselves in the binary as like a surrogate for how good of a job the developers are doing caring about security, right? And they can rate on a scale of 0 to 100. It's kind of like the energy efficiency scale, like how good does it look like this thing is? It doesn't mean that they find defects, but they can tell you, it looks like these guys know what the hell they're doing, to looks like they don't know what the hell's going on. And Firefox is well at the end of the spectrum away from all the other browsers. So if you are still in that camp of like, I use Firefox because I care about security, like get your head out of 1999's ass and come to the future and use some other browser. So thank you. Anyway, this is a talk about testing, by the way. I don't know if you had noticed, so, because I had not as of yet. So how do you find the weaknesses? How do you find the risks? What do? You fill out a Scantron. Aha! There are Scantrons. There are 3 different form factors of Scantrons. I have no idea. My school only used the small thin ones, but there's whole Scantron sheets. Like, yes, yeah, it's frightening. And Scantron is still a thing also, which was a surprising thing to me as well. So as it turns out, there's more to life than pen tests. Finding, search for, I'm shitty with images and GIFs, so this is me literally putting random strings into Google and be like, angry hacker, and I found this cat. So I'm like, cool. We do a lot of penetration testing, right? Jeez, my wife's throwing me right off kilter. There are decades of work around software testing, around systems testing, that make what we do look like child's play. I was talking earlier, just a few minutes ago before the talk, about airline safety and aviation safety, right? So I've had the luxury of working on airplanes from avionics. If you think of a plane, there's really 3 zones to a plane. There's the avionics, the stuff that actually controls the flaps, controls the engines, makes the thing actually work. There's the flight deck and all the flight control systems, the things that the pilots have access to. And then there's the cabin. And then if you think about the pace of innovation in those areas, it's slowest in the avionics and fastest in the cabin. The cabin is, they can rip and tear and put new ones in. People want to watch movies. People want iPad integration, whatever. There are companies that are integrating that all the time. Rolls-Royce builds engines, and they only have a handful of models, and they build those fucking things for serious. So, like, there is real, adult, grown-up engineering that happens in the front of an airplane that keeps a plane in the air. I hate flying. I hate it. Oh my God, I hate it. But you know what planes really want to do? Fly. They're really good at it. You know what causes them to crash? The big balls of goo inside, right? Like, we do stupid shit, like land on the wrong runway, like, oops, it was a taxiway. That's what causes planes to crash. The amount of testing that goes on an aircraft to keep the plane in the air is almost unfathomable if you haven't been exposed to that universe. We think like, oh, some dude went and pen tested an engine. No, like, there are formal design processes. There's all kinds of testing that they do. It's staged and staged and staged before an engine ever gets bolted onto a plane. It's gone through ungodly amounts of safety and security testing that most of us, again, don't have any exposure to. So what I'm trying to say is we would be well served to look at that kind of engineering and those kind of tests in order to try to make our systems more secure. So taking a step back, why do we perform security testing? First of all, security is an emergent property of the system, right? It's not something that the system does on its own. You know, if a system is designed to do mathematics, like, that's a function of the system. Does it do it securely? I don't know. I got to determine it because it's an emergent property. There's multiple ways to think about security, and I find having some structure when you think about how to build and then break systems is important. So first thing to think about are errors in security functionality, right? Security functionality, the things that we put in there specifically, the controls designed to keep the system running the way that we want it. Authentication, authorization, auditing, does it, encrypt shit, all that kind of thing. That is a security functionality. My favorite little break in that recently was Ansible Vault. Had this cute little bug that if you set the password for your vault to be some Python code, it would just execute the Python code. Sweet, like, that's good to know. That's a fun trick. Like, that's probably not a desired trait, just to be clear. Like, normally you don't want your password executing for you, backtick/cat. Anyway, the other type of error is errors that lead to security weaknesses, right? So these are things that on the face of it aren't security controls, they're not security functionalities, but they're things that when they break, they have security ramifications. Parsers are a great example of this. Like, every parser, if broken, is usually a vector into a system, right? There are plenty of instances with image magic, with Windows image rendering, where somebody could construct a malicious JPEG or PNG or whatever, and then you could execute code that was inside the PNG, right? Again, not exactly the state that we desired to have, but it's something that turned into a security critical bug instead of just kind of a run-of-the-mill defect. The other way to think about this is errors in architecture and design. So if you designed an insecure system, it doesn't matter how you implement it, okay? If the thing sucks on paper, it's going to suck on code. It's just the way it's going to work. So if you've designed a system that doesn't have sufficient authentication, if you design a system that doesn't have the right kind of access control, if you don't have role-based access control and you provision me as a user, like, okay, I'm going to go execute super user stuff because you gave me the ability to do it. QED. Then there's errors in implementation. This is where I have some design, secure or not, but then I screw it up when I go to implement it. I write bad code. And this is a lot of what we think about when we think about security in software, is that fuck up in implementation. But I'm here to tell you that the errors in architecture and design are actually more tragic, more Shakespearean, if you will. Chaucer may have spoken about them. I might have to go Google like Chaucer security quotes later on. That's probably a good place to spend my evening with also bourbon. So, those errors don't go away. And once you implement a system that has those defects, you're pretty much fucked, because then you have to go in and forklift your way out of it. So when we look at like credit card processing, there's a system that was not designed for modern threat actors. It worked in the 70s, but didn't work today. So when we went and had all these problems with these breaches, there was no way to take the existing magstripe card systems and make them secure in a way that we cared about. So we went to chip and signature, because that fucking works. I was involved in a startup in the late 90s that was trying to do SET, Secure Electronic Transaction. It was a Visa and MasterCard standard to do public key-based credit card transactions that Visa and MasterCard quietly killed while we were out raising millions of venture capital and burning it in a hole in the ground in Anchorage. We burned through a lot of VC. It was very exciting. Nobody wanted to deploy new credit cards in the late 90s because there was not enough fraud. And it required a wholesale replacement of the cards, the readers, the back-end systems, everything. And Visa and MasterCard got no traction and they killed the whole thing. Well, 2017 rolls around and suddenly there's chips everywhere, but it's basically still using the old EMV standard from Europe from like 20 some odd years ago. The shit's slow because it's still a 5 megahertz smart card, right? Like, it's still like, hey, like you can see the signal coming off that thing, right? Like 5 megahertz was fast on a little chip in 1990, and it's slow as shit right now, but we still use the goddamn card. So, I could rant about the credit card problems for a long time, but the fact of the matter is, once we had enough pain, and that architecture didn't work anymore, we've gone through this wholesale replacement of all the point-of-sale systems, of all the cards, and we're still not there yet, right? So errors in architecture and design are the fatal flaws that will kill a lot of systems, but in the case of credit cards, like, what are you going to do? Stop fucking using credit cards? I'm sure some of you know people that try to use cash all the time. It's hard. Also, you need to carry a lot of weapons because people will try to steal said cash, so it's complicated. Most people I know that pay in cash also carry firearm. Like to be clear, like there's almost 100% unity between I pay with everything in cash and I have a really big fucking gun. I'm like, yes, absolutely. What? Second, yeah, people like, it's probably the same guy. It's like one guy, right? They're like, yep, I know him. I know that cat. Suitcase full of cash and a gun. So testing is different than secure development. This is kind of goes without saying, but testing is an integral part of this. And when I say secure development, I mean both secure development like SDLC and also like, hey, I'm trying to deploy a full system. I'm not going to get into like what a secure SDLC looks like. There's books out there. Microsoft has a book, but it's a little heavy if you're trying to do software development in a place that's not Microsoft, but there are lots of places to learn about secure SDLC processes. I'm not going to touch on them here. Here are terms that we use a lot in this industry, right? We use the ideas of black box and white box testing, and we're all familiar with them, or mostly familiar with them. The thing that I want to point out in the years that I've done security testing, knowledge is time compression. That's all it is, right? When an attacker goes to pick up a system and they don't understand it, they're going to spend time on it. And if it's worth their effort to understand it, they'll eventually shred it, right? They'll learn everything they can about it through open source, or reverse engineering, through getting jobs at the places that build the thing. They will figure out how it works. When we're assessing a system, if we want to play this black box game and model the attacker, like, you got to be doing it for a reason. Right? Because otherwise you're just wasting time and giving some security person a big ego because they figured out how all your shit works. Like, I had one company that they had like some proprietary protocol and some over-the-air thing, and they're like, well, you know, no one's going to ever figure out how this protocol works, so we're really not worried about the encryption that's underneath it because it's not important because the protocol itself will protect it. I'm like, yeah, okay, that's cool. I left that client at 5 o'clock at night with a data dump, and I mailed it to one of my coworkers in Virginia, and I said, hey, can you reverse engineer this protocol for me? By 8 o'clock the next morning, he had sent me a Wireshark plugin that would completely decode everything, and including like annotations like, this appears to be the data field. I don't know what it is, but it's the same. You know, here's a counter, here's a checksum, here's this other thing. Here, if I send this thing in, I'm going to expect these kind of results. It was a challenge response thing, so he had all the app dues documented and everything. And I go to the client, I'm like, is this your protocol? And the dude was like, he was absolutely dumbstruck. He was like, you must have taken our documentation and done this. I'm like, guy, it was a dude with like a bottle of bourbon in Virginia. Like, he literally, look at his notes, he doesn't even know what the protocol is. Like, he has no idea what your business is, but he reverse engineered this thing in a night when he was getting blotto. So, and that client was awakened. He's like, oh shit, like, clearly people are going to be able to figure this out. I've done a lot of tests over the last 20 years or whatever. I've been, again, for reasons beyond I can comprehend. I've had the luxury of hacking. I've hacked trains, I've hacked cars, I've hacked planes, I've hacked banks, I've hacked multinational organizations, governments, all kinds of crazy shit. And only one time have I ever modeled an attacker in a black box way for a reason that I felt was legitimate. And it was a product that was designed basically to slow attackers down from reverse engineering shit. And they said, what's the work factor that's required to get through all of our protections? That's legitimate use. Everything else is just people fucking around trying to feel like rock stars, right? Like, go get the information, get everything you can, save your clients money, save your company money, and just compress time with knowledge. That's all white box testing is, right? So if you find yourself in the mode, and I apologize if I'm being judgmental here, but I'm going to because it's so rare that I see black box testing perform for the right purposes, right? It's often just theatrics, which can be okay. It's the same reason, I mean, we do pen tests for theatric reasons, right? Sometimes you're in an organization, you're like, we have no security problems. Like, is this your conference room VTC? Like, fuck, we have security problems, right? Like, there is nothing scarier to a CEO than like a selfie taken from their own camera without them knowing. They're like, whoa, hey, like, thank God I wasn't picking my nose and he took that. Well, like, I deleted the other 6. So, I actually had one guy tell me, he's like, you could have told me in advance so I could have sat up straight. Because like the outbrief had him like in his chair like this. Like, I thought it was better like that. So here's a software development process, right? It's conceptual. If you're waterfall, agile, DevOps, I don't care. These are conceptual locations of things that you would do. There are touch points for security testing throughout any SDLC that you're going to have. If you're early on, you're going to make abuse cases, or you should be, right? Your developer should be thinking, I'm writing this unit, how would I abuse it? How would I, go and violate the security of this thing? I'm going to write tests to make sure that my abuse cases don't come to pass. I'm going to have risk analysis and stack analysis and all this kind of shit. Now, if you look at it and you're a buyer or you're an operator, right? You're not building the system, but you're in some enterprise. You really can only work on the far right of this, right? So you can only do risk analysis, product assessment, dynamic analysis is a thing, penetration testing, and then other people will break into your stuff, right? That's security testing, just not by you. It's like cloud pen testing, right? It's someone else's computer, it's someone else's pen test. They just broke into your shit. So, I kind of like that. There's a breach as a cloud pen test. No one else does. That was just absolutely, like, in my mind, I'm like, that makes perfect fucking sense. And like, hey, he's rambling, man. It gets better. So what I want to cover is on the right-hand side, and specifically this distinction between product assessments and penetration tests. When I was doing consulting, security consulting, we would have people come to us and say, I need a penetration test. And what they really wanted was, I need a detailed assessment of my product from a security perspective, and I need to know how to fix the thing, right? It wasn't that I needed you to come in and do like some targeted thing and model an attacker. They wanted a comprehensive view of the security of the product. The problem is a lot of software developers and system designers don't have kind of a lexicon in which they can communicate that, but they know what pen testing is, right? Just like all blockchain technology isn't Bitcoin, but son of a bitch, if you won't call everything Bitcoin, that's blockchain, right? Like, oh, that ICO on Bitcoin, like, fuck you! Sorry. Bitcoin is right there with IPv6 in my universe as far as things that are fake. A lot of shade I will throw on that crap. So, meanwhile, there's people who've made millions of dollars of Bitcoin who are like, yeah, go fuck you, I have a pile of money, which is true, and I can't argue with that. So, I think I'm up to 55 F-bombs so far. So what's generally needed are, a broad-scale assessment, not how we got root. So what does that look like? Like, what does a real product assessment look like? Well, here's kind of an idealized security testing process, right? It starts with risk. What does the business do? What does it care about? What would be a critically bad thing to happen from a security perspective? What's the organization geared up to handle this? And then threat modeling. Who are the real threat actors? I'm going to get into some more detail on these, but this is the ideal steps, right? Who are the actual bad people who wish us harm, and what would they do? Right? There's all kinds of bad people out there, but sometimes like what they're going to do is not what you think. I've seen lots of clients who, I had one client well, he wasn't even a client. I got a cold call, and it was a company in Michigan, an industrial control system company that makes like valves that turn water systems on and off. And I'm like, hey, cool, like you care about security. I asked the so why now question, right? This is an important one to understand. Like, why now? Like, why has a light bulb gone off in your head that you called us and say, I care about security? And the guy says, I'm worried about the NSA coming in and stealing all our stuff. And I look at like the guy I'm with, I'm like, is this real? Like, are we on Punk'd? Is Ashton Kutcher over there? And it turns out, no, it was real. Like, this dude had seen like all the Snowden stuff and everything and was just convinced that the NSA was going to break in and steal all his shit. And I tried to correct him because I'm like, first of all, if your adversary really is the NSA, you're screwed, right? Like, okay, like you're a 50-person shop and you're fucked. But secondarily, what would they do with it? Sell it to China? Like, I was so confused about the why NSA would break in. I'm like, also, it's illegal, but I'm cool. If you're cool with chemtrails, I'm cool with chemtrails, and there's conspiracies everywhere, so fuck that shit. So, you gotta understand your threats. Then you gotta do like some sort of system analysis, like what is the thing I'm trying to test? How does it work? Then I gotta think about it. How would I test it? Where are the weak points? Where are the places I'd want to actually attack it? Then implement the test, then pwn it, and then watch, rinse, repeat until I kind of get the coverage that I want, and then report it, right? This is a security testing process. In reality, we do things like this. What's your threat? Me! Like, I am the badass. Like, I break into things, and what I do is what attackers would do. I run, I don't know, Metasploit, Mimikatz, and I win. And then you do some sort of system analysis. You kind of look at it and say, yeah, I know what the fuck it is you do. And then you write a bunch of code, and then you pwn and you pwn and you pwn, and then you fill out your little template and you say, hey, here's the state of the quality of your system. In the years that I've been, again, testing random shit for a living, there is exactly one time I used an automated, two times. I used an automated or any kind of attack platform like Metasploit or Core or whatever. One time was for the government where we were doing a public demonstration and we had to use a known public exploit because it would be really bad if NSA was showing exploits that the public didn't know about to demonstrate some protection technology. So we used Core. And then we had another client who later on says, my boss says you have to use Core. So we like pressed some buttons and then put it away and then just broke into the system the way that we normally did, which was with our brains and some Python and copious amounts of sugar. So you couldn't drink on the job, so you just got really high on sugar, just so you're clear. So what to expect from testing? So if you buy into the thesis that this is okay and this is what we do, how do you close that gap? Right? If I'm going to perform an assessment of a product, of a system, and I want more structure than I am the law, fear me, what do you do? Well, the first thing is we got to look back and say, what do we expect from the testing process? One, I want a clear description at the end of the test of what's wrong, right? Like, what do the defects look like? It's not just an abstract, like, here's a loose description. Like, I want to know concretely what's wrong. I want to know how to reproduce it, right? Good testing, it doesn't matter if it's security testing or not, should be reproducible, right? You should have the ability to independently verify. Some of you have probably served as IV&V people where you independently validate and verify other people's work to say, yay, verily, I can do the same thing that they done and it works okay. That's super important from a security perspective. And it's super important to help companies and organizations build more secure product that they actually see how to reproduce it themselves. So when you provide a report, at the end of the report, the customer should be like, oh, yeah, I can do this now. And I get the whole bullshit with customers like, can I watch you so I know how to do that? And we all know, like, they're not figuring that out, right? Like, that's not how knowledge transfer works. Like, I don't get to watch a guy building a nuclear reactor and be like, I am now a nuclear physicist. Like, no. But if there are knowledgeable people on staff, the customer should be able to say, they found this defect. Can you find it too? That's important. Next is, the ability to assess the quality of the testing. I've had lots of people that did reproducible tests and they sucked, right? Like, it was just bad. Like, it was either primitive or the wrong target or whatever. So you want the client or whoever, I say client, I was a dirty consultant. It's very hard to get out of that mindset. But, they should be able to figure out, are you full of shit, right? To my opening slide, like, I don't expect you to believe anything I'm telling you today. I'm trying to provide you with enough evidence that you can go out, check it out on your own. You can learn from this. You can find other resources. Your client should have the ability to do the same thing when it comes to testing. Determine if you're full of shit. And if they determine you're not, usually it's good because then they'll call you again. And if they do, you get a bad rep and you get to go learn how to do your job over. Understanding the impact. Yeah, it's obvious. A clear view of what's not tested. This is one of the areas, I think, especially from a penetration for this operational testing, very late life cycle stuff. It's very hard to understand what was not tested. Like, you may scan a bunch of things, you may find a bunch of interfaces, and you might poke at a few of them, and then you find one and you dig, and then you get in. Do you report to the client, I looked at these 10 other things and didn't get in? You should be, right? That's important. You tell them the work effort, like I spent about a couple hours looking at these things, and we did this, and that didn't result in anything. I've had people who say, don't tell me that. All right, we'll just give you the high, mediums, and lows. We won't give you the informationals. But my personal belief is the informationals of, like, here's the things we looked at and we couldn't get through is super important. Because either it means, it could mean it's reasonably secure. It could also mean you just didn't spend enough time or you didn't even have the skills to do it, right? I'm a software guy and it was a hardware component. I hooked up a USB port and it didn't do anything. I'm like, I don't know, fuck, that's as good as I can get. And you unplug it and you walk away. Short-term and long-term remediation actions are also important. So the short-term remediation action is, you've got a cross-site scripting in this thing, right? Like, it's a website. You can XSS it. You should go fix that cross-site scripting error. The long-term remediation is, I found 5 cross-site scripting errors. You might want to have a platform in place to prevent this from happening in the first place. There's lots of frameworks out there that will help you not have XSS problems. That's a long-term remediation, right? It's not a page. It's a way that you do business. And those recommendations are also very useful to organizations. So, something that's interesting about this process that I'm describing is that it's kind of multidisciplinary, right? It requires knowledge from a lot of different places. It requires a fair degree of creativity. Here's Scotland giving a keynote yesterday where she's talking about the creativity in hacking systems. It's important to be open to knowing what you don't know, working as a team, and kind of engaging a broader community of people when you're performing a product assessment. I was talking to Johnny Long earlier today, and we were lamenting the old days when you could just be an army of one, right? Like, testing things because the state of the art was relatively primitive. You could just come in and be like, woo, I know all the shit, and you probably did, because the shit to know was relatively small. But that's not today, right? That's not 2017. You need a much broader group of people. You need people that know risk management, software, hardware, exploit dev, whatever you can all fucking read. Todd's not here. Todd's a longtime schmoo, friend of ours from up in Alaska. And I was talking to Todd last night, and Todd's a QA engineer for a company out in Silicon Valley. He was talking about how hard it is to hire QA engineers. First of all, there's the QA smell, right? Like, and I don't mean like the physical smell, but the fact like, oh, you do QA. When I was on my way of dropping out of college, I went to a career fair, and Microsoft was talking to a bunch of people. So Microsoft was there, and there's all these guys who are really like hardcore CS majors. They're like, woo, yeah, I want to work at Microsoft. I want to sling code. I want to write Excel. I'm like, that's a weird goal. And I'm like, hey, if I don't want to write code, what can I do? And the guy's like, oh, you could do QA. And he said it in such a way I realized, like, oh, QA is a second-class citizen. I gotcha. Cool, thank you. I'm out. And I did not go write QA at Microsoft, just so we're clear. I never took that job. Although they never offered me that job. So it's a very, very easy decision for me to make. So Todd's a good dude, and Todd's trying to figure out how to build. He's got a pretty decent QA process in place, and he says, I ask 3 questions when I interview people for QA, and it struck me as the same kind of things that I think about when I'm trying to find people who can do product assessments. The first question is, write me a C program that will compile but crashes. Okay? And he's looking for things like people talking about null pointer dereferencing or something like that. Some indication that the compiler's going to not necessarily know the thing you're doing is stupid, but at runtime, the dynamic analysis is going to say, wow, that was stupid. Here's your core. That's question 1. Question 2 is, you've got a website, lives in var dub, and in it, there's like 15 places where your phone number has been put in incorrectly. How would you find all the files in the subdirectories that have those incorrect phone numbers? Looking for knowledge of system utilities, regular expressions, things of that nature. So that's discrete from software development, right? I've met plenty of software developers who think that Linux is dark magic, and not in a good way, right? Or not in a bad way. Linux is dark magic, also fuck systemd. So, always good for a joke. If I don't set a resolver, I don't want you to either. Like, that is one of the most fatal sins of an operating system. The third thing that Todd asks is, when you click send on an email, what happens? And he's looking for things like, talking about DNS and MX records and SMTP, and not like Google finds the other person and delivers it to their mailbox. And like, SMTP, like, there's more to mail than Google, right? Like, it's not, everyone does not have a Gmail account. I love when I type in, like, my address on a web form, and I type in gdead@shmoo.com, and it'll be like, did you mean gdead@yahoo.com or gdead@gmail.com? I'm like, no, fuck you. Like, there are other domains. And also Yahoo, like, no, like, God, no. Of course I didn't mean that. So that's a pretty diverse skill set, though, right? Like, you've got the system and the operating system, you've got internetworking knowledge, and then you've got this idea of how languages work. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. When someone says, here, you need to, like, break that, you have to figure out what this is. You got hardware, there's the implant, so there's the software on the bottom. No one? Okay, all right. The microphone stand is listening to you. That was what I was getting at. It's been implanted by it. Anyway, all right. All tests start with risk. So the first thing you should be doing, even if it's not a formal one, is some kind of risk assessment. So there are lots of ways to perform risk assessments. You can go out and spend lots of money with organizations like EY or McKinsey and get really fancy ones. You can just grab random people off the street and say, what do you think? In reality, so if you go search for me at DEF CON, you'll find a presentation where I talked about how to do risk assessments in an approachable way that doesn't require a lot of overhead and thinking. You can fast forward through the first 15 minutes of it because A, we were having fun with Paul Proctor, and then B, I discovered at DEF CON that there was real-time transcription going on. And the transcriptionist started talking to me through the transcription, and it was so exciting. Like, it is far and away the most fun I've ever had on stage once I realized the transcriptionist was there and would talk to me. Normally, they're not allowed to do that, but they said for DEF CON, they, like, let them off the chain, and if the opportunity presents itself, like, have fun with it. And so she was putting, like, random shit in the middle of my talk, and it was so funny. And we actually talked to the woman who was in charge of the DEF CON transcription. She was on site, so the company that DEF CON had contracted to. And what was fascinating is they'll actually, in advance for technical conferences, they'll look at previous year's events and they'll transcribe them because there's all kinds of lingo. If you're a pediatrician or security or whatever it is, there's stuff that they don't know the words. And so they'll watch and they'll transcribe and they'll spend weeks drilling to get ready for the event because the point of transcription is it's real time. And so they had to like go Google, like, what the fuck's a SYN packet? Like, that's not going to work. And so they get smart on the thing and then they'll transcribe. But the general rule is like, don't break the third wall, fourth wall, fifth wall. What wall is it? Fourth, thank you. Why? I don't know why. Is that the one where the screen, the television camera is? Oh! Epiphany, thank you. Yeah, I got wicked smart today. And it's the fifth estate, right? That's the... I'm gone? All right. So, yeah, I'm really, once I get out of my happy, fun zone of security, I'm actually pretty stupid. Autodidact. I'm autodidacting my way to success today. That's my new shirt. So while I'm here and I'm talking about risk, I can't not talk about PCI. So as far as things that aren't grounded in risk, like Mother of God, right? So I don't know if you know, but I help out with ShmooCon. Heidi runs ShmooCon. Yay, Heidi. Woo! Yay. And I kind of, like, I stand up a lot of our infrastructure. So I stand up the servers and everything. And I'm a shitty system administrator. I've been doing system administration for long enough that I just don't give a fuck, right? Like, I'm the Chuck Norris of system administration. Like, run as root, do everything as root. Like, I don't give a shit. Although I guess that's in vogue now with AWS. Like, everything's EC2 user. Happens to be root. Like, you just run around. Like, DevOps people are stupid. So... Anyway, invariably, I'll get an email from someone like, I ran a scanner against your website, and it says that you're using an out-of-date cipher. And I want to jam the out-of-date cipher up that person's ass. Like, there is no planet on which credit card fraud has been performed by some dude downgrading you to yet another cipher and then jamming it through AWS or their Bitcoin mining thing or whatever and cracking the stream on the off chance that there's a credit card number in it, right? I don't know if you looked at your browser, but it makes like 1 billion connections to a website. Which one has your credit card? Who fucking knows? It's all encrypted. Just because it's triple DES instead of AES, who gives a fuck? Like, no one's doing this. This is not grounded in reality. Okay? PCI, those requirements are like common sense, but they're not fatal flaws. They're not high, they're not medium, they're not even lows. I don't give a fuck. Like, I'll get to it when I get to it, guy. Sorry. I'm a CISO. It's so fun. So if you're not aligning against specific risks, you're just attacking the system, right? Like, you've all seen small children roam around and do stuff randomly, and they're like, oh, that's really funny. They think that's a real can of Coke, they're trying to open it. That's really cute, That's what we do when we don't think about risk. We're like, fun. You're like, I scanned things and there were open ports and shit broke. It's like, that's awesome. Gold star. Lunch is at noon, and then we'll have nap time. Wow, sorry. I mean, really talking down to the entirety of the penetration testing industry, and I'm sorry for that. At some point, the weird thing is now, as a CISO, I'm actually a consumer of shit, and I have to buy things, and I'm starting to run into people like, oh, you. And I'm like, oh, shit. I just got a 2-0 multiple put on my cost. Like, that's great. Threat modeling. So, no testing has complete coverage. I mean, not in the universe that we live in, right? There are universes in which people care about this. There's universes in which we care about it and we can't do it. And we do, like the universe of concolic execution and shit like that is actually fascinating, but something that we're not going to get into today. However, what we do want to do is be able to say, I am testing the parts of the system that are likely to be attacked by the people who are going to attack your system. So I've done a risk assessment. I understand the kind of the parts of what you care about and what's likely to be of concern to your organization. Now I'm going to think about who's going to attack you and what are they going to do. Again, complicated subject. Adam Shostak's got a really good book on this, but it's a little dense, and if you're not a software engineer, it's maybe not as applicable as you want. I've got a process. You can Google me. I gave a talk here at Derbycon a couple years ago on it. What does it say? Oh, you can DuckDuckGo it. Sorry, not Google it. DuckDuckGo for the win. I still use Google as a verb, but you should use DuckDuckGo as a verb instead. Also, as a search engine, you should use it instead. So, you should DuckDuckGo that. Also, if you're a Usenix member, I wrote something for login. Usenix is still a thing, by the way. And I wrote an article on login on threat modeling. I won't bore you with it, but it's important to do. It's an area that's even less understood than risk assessments and risk management are, but it's, I think, very important for the process that we're talking about here. Next, architecture and design review. Before you look at the code, look at how the system's built, right? Look at the high-level structure, create a bunch of artifacts. Invariably, you think like an architecture and design review is someone's going to say, here's the architecture and design. You'd be, oh, thank you, I'm going to look at it. In reality, they're like, well, I got an hour and a whiteboard, so let me just draw some shit out for you, right? Okay, that sounds like an architecture and design review. In fact, that's how most of my architecture and design reviews go. Like, here's documentation that's a year out of date. Also, here's all of our epics and shit in Agile. And then, I don't know, here's Bill, and Bill knows everything. You just ask him whatever questions you need. I've done security assessments where, at the end of it, we'll parrot back the architecture and design. And the client will be, they tell us, I would pay you just for that work. Like, we didn't understand what we had built, and you provided clarity around the thing that we had built. These are established, profitable companies with large product offerings that literally couldn't put together like a 4-box, 3-line representation of the thing that they did. Okay? And I mean, it happens, right? You're inside the sausage maker, you can't see what's happening, and then you're like, is this what you do for a living? They're like, oh yes, that's absolutely what I do for a living. So creating these artifacts is useful for our purposes for testing, but it's also useful for the people who build the systems, because oftentimes they don't know, like, I had external interfaces? Like, yes, as a matter of fact, like, you get feeds from all these places, and those things that you parse that are fed to you could be bad, and that could own your shit. Oh, and a light bulb goes off. Next thing that you do is you create test cases, or you should do. And these are not the actual code. This is, I'm thinking conceptually about how I would break this system. I'm looking at the parsers, the external interfaces, any role boundaries, security controls that are in place, and thinking, if it went bad with respect to architecture, design, the implementation, where would those failures be security critical, and then how would I test it? The test case practically looks like this, right? There's some sort of description of the test, of what you want to do. There's the negative security impact. What's the result of the thing when it happens? There's pseudocode or some kind of description of like, here's how we would go about building this test out, and then miscellaneous notes. The important thing at the top is the impact the test is going to have. It's successful, right? Is this like a big break? Does this tear the whole system down? And then the complexity of the test. I've been in a lot of systems like we dreamed up and we knew we can implement a test to break it, but the cost of implementing the attack was really high, right? And we'd have to go to the client and be like, do you want us to do this? Do you want us to spend the time and money? Because then what you have to do is start horse trading, right? You brainstorm, you think of all these tests, and then you sit down and say, what ones do I want to build? Given the risk assessment that I've done, the threat modeling, the time, the cost, the expertise. Sometimes you don't have the expertise on staff to carry out some of these tests. Which ones do we want to focus on? Then you rank them, you take the top end, you build them, right? And oftentimes, I used to run a lab, and we tested smart cards for all the smart card manufacturers, and we had automated test processes in place to try to break these cards. And we had 200 or 300 different test cases that we implemented to break the cards, and they were all automated and all very successful for the most part in doing what we wanted them to do. But some of the test cases turned out to be impossible to write, right? Like they were doing really weird crypto attacks. We did side channel stuff and other odds and ends, and some of them were just too hard. And we had to keep an eye on the developers and be like, hey, you spent 3 days on like basically the same piece of C code. If you can't make it work, like whoop, GTFO, work on the next thing. Run the tests. They won't work. Learn from your mistakes, right? This is what we're familiar with in our universe, right? I'm trying to pwn the thing's not pwned, go to 10, right? Pwn the thing's not pwned, go to 10, pwn the thing is pwned, go to the bar. So, a few random thoughts as I'm running out of time and I'm hustling my way through this thing. If you are a developer, like unit tests are a thing that you do. You should do security testing when you do unit testing. Abuse tests and things like that are real, they're important, and then you could feed them into your CI process so that you have security testing in your CI process. All this stuff is super important. It's a broad landscape. I'm happy to talk about it outside of this place, but developers are absolutely shitty at security. I mean, we know this, and it's not through any fault of their own. They're not even taught it, right? CS students aren't really even taught testing. I saw people on, I don't know if it's Steve Bellevin, but one of the graybeards around, lamenting the other day, like, we basically don't even teach testing to computer science students anymore, right? They're too busy learning Java, because that's important. So if they don't know testing, how the hell are they going to know about security, right? I've hired kids out of NSA Centers of Excellence that have taken security class. I say, what did you learn? And they said, well, I learned how to crack polyalphabetic Caesar ciphers. I'm like, oh, that's contemporary. Like, that's good. So when Caesar shows up with Bill and Ted, like, we will be ready to jam that shit, man. But no. Even to the point of like, do students understand like the whole "can you write me a C program that can compile and not crash"? It's amazing what computer science students don't know about software when they graduate. When we, I'm sure a lot of you have similar circumstances. When you sit down and you teach them, here's how we write exploits, here's how we break into things, they're like, you can do that with a buffer overflow? I'm like, guy, that's even been mitigated. Let's look at some more advanced shit. Like, and you start teaching them ROP, and they're like, wow, I didn't know. I'm like, I know you didn't know. Whatever that sentence you're about to finish, like, I'm assure you don't know any of this landscape. And it's not taught to them. They've never been taught to think, like, this thing that I wrote is actually its own weapon and can hurt itself. Right? They don't understand that as the reality of what it takes to write software. I had software developers, third-year computer science students, so I handed a pile of shit to them and say, this is your computer, put it together. The dude didn't know what RAM looked like. He's like, what's this? I said, RAM. He said, really? Where does it go? In the computer, asshole! Like, I was like, unbelievable. This guy didn't know. Third-year computer science student had never looked inside of a computer in his life, and he wrote good code. Like, he was also, all he ate was turkey sandwiches too, so he was an odd cat. I mean, this guy was, he was an intern, he was staying in an apartment, the heat went off in the wintertime, and he was pretty shy, he didn't want to call the landlord, so he just turned his oven on and opened the door for days, and so one of the other interns walked in and was like, dude, you can't do that, like, here, I'll help you call the landlord, so, we kept good care of him, he lived, he went back to school. I felt good about shepherding him through 6 months of successful life. So he also ate a whole cheese pizza once. That was pretty exciting. What do you want for lunch? Cheese pizza. How many? A couple slices? Like a large? Oh, okay. Top. Oh, yeah. He's not here. The last thing I want to part with, next to last, bugs from the outside. People are going to own your shit. You should be ready for it and embrace it. And I don't mean like you have to go hire HackerOne or whatever, but you need to be prepared for this thing. Like you should have /security and security at your company as a thing, right? When things go wrong, you should have a clear way like, hey, we care about security. If you found something, please tell us. Not, hey, we care about security. Here's our lawyers. Good luck. We've left those days, right? Like we've had these conversations. Also, the term responsible disclosure should never be used because it implies that there's irresponsible disclosure, which puts the onus on the person finding the vulnerability and trying to report it, not the company that wrote the shitty thing, right? The responsibility is on the company that wrote the shitty thing, not the person that found it. So I would highly encourage you to think very deeply about the term responsible disclosure, and if you've used it, I would please encourage you not to use it. Of all the things I actually care about today, I hope you learned something about testing. I honest to God hope that we don't use the term responsible disclosure anymore, right? Of all the things that you take away today, please stop using that term. So what? I should have put that on the slide. I didn't even intend to get there. The world of systems testing is vast. I was really drunk when I got to the slide. I was just like, I should have a so what slide. Whatever. Fuck that. Questions? Yes, the red-haired one in front. I know you. Yes, you're my son. I know you. When I say in every sentence, I'm really a bad orator, that's why. I'm loud and funny, but that basically barely makes up for the fact that I say a lot. He's very critical of my speech for a 6-year-old. I hope you enjoy walking home. Any questions from non-blood relatives? Server? So the question is, would I rely on, how would I structure an organization and when I have it be an information security team or an embed? I think you have to have a little bit of both. One thing I didn't mention earlier in the whole CISO discussion, like your CISO should never report to your CIO, ever, period. They support your general counsel, support your CEO, support your CFO, never to the CISO because that's a conflicting whatever the fuck, they conflict. So interest, that was the word I was looking for. I think that in successful organizations I've seen, they have a kind of, quote, center of excellence that is a security organization that does nothing but set the policies, standards, and that kind of thing. And then they have people embedded with the development teams to help the developers write good code, make good tests, and that kind of thing. That's the most successful, but it also, coincidentally, it's like the most goddamn expensive way to do it because it requires a shitload of people. So, on that note, my time is up. People are leaving because they're sick of my shit, so thank you very much.